everyone, welcome to Training Tuesday for Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. I am Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. And for tonight's episode, I've chosen a variety of learners for you to view during their training sessions. And this week, I haven't chosen them because they're at different skill levels or different stages in their training. I've chosen these learners because they're at different levels of consistency with their training. I want you to think of a person or an animal that you know of, that maybe you work with as an athlete, as a learner, as a fellow student, as a coworker, or as an employee. And I want you to think about if you had to work on a project with this person or animal, or if you needed this animal or this person to compete in some type of really important competition. So for example, if I was going to enter my dog in a sit competition and I was going to get a year of free dog food if my dog could win this competition, and all she had to do was be the dog that sat 5 times the fastest, I know exactly which dog I would pick out. Now, think about a coworker that sometimes does fantastic work and really solid work, and think about a coworker that is even better than that one that you were just thinking of, but their work's inconsistent. Sometimes they do better work than anybody, but other times they just seem very unmotivated and they don't want to work at all. Which one would you choose to team up with if you had to do some sort of work project that was going to result in a raise? Or let's think about a horse running a horse race, and we've got 2 horses, and one consistently runs well and performs well, but they may not necessarily be the fastest. And then you have another horse that could outrun any horse out there in the world, but they're inconsistent. You never know on race day if they're going to completely flop or if they're going to excel. Well, I want you to understand that snakes are no different. All living things have differences in consistency when they're performing, working, training, or learning. And it all depends on individual temperament and personality, individual cognitive abilities, individual drive and motivation levels. It's the same with your snakes. And so I have a lot of snakes here, and they're all at different levels of consistency. And I often show you snakes that do very well in training because I want to set good examples, and I want to show you what these snakes are capable of achieving if you take the time to work with them. But certainly, if I was going to enter one of my snakes in a target training competition, there are specific ones that hands down I would pick out to enter in those competitions. And there are others that maybe on any given day might do better than the one I choose, are just so inconsistent that they could show up on the competition day and not even engage in the training. Or there are snakes here that are excellent foragers. They're excellent at puzzle feeding. And then I have a few that excel at puzzle feeding on occasion, and it's hit or miss. So I want you to just realize that as you're training your snakes, don't get discouraged if they're hit or miss. If you have a really, really excellent training session one day with your snake, and then the next time you work with them, it's like they don't even remember anything and you've never worked with them a day in their lives. That is just normal because these are living things. Now, you may have lucked out and you may have a snake or 2 that just is always consistent with their training, and they just do a really good job every single time. But you also might have a snake that does an excellent job a few times or here and there, and then sometimes just forgets that they ever learned anything. And I just want you guys to understand that that's how living organisms work, and that is normal. And you may only have 1 or 2 snakes at home, and so you've got to work with the one that you have, and you have to be happy and love the 1 or 2 that you have, and just understand how their personality and temperament is, what their motivation level is like, what their level of drive is like when you're engaging them in activities, And don't be discouraged if sometimes they do really, really well, and other times they act like you've never taught them a thing in their whole life.
This is number one. Not only is it our first example of a very consistent snake, but her name is number one, and she's always extremely consistent with her targeting. She is a little apprehensive about the prey lately because a live mouse squeezed itself into her habitat, and that freaked her out a little bit, which is why she's in a temporary enclosure right now. Now, this snake, Gaheris, is also always very, very consistent with his targeting, and he's a perfect example of slow and steady wins the race. He was looking off to our right when I started the session, and I had to show him the target on the glass on the outside of the enclosure and get him to move over to my left. And then he was very carefully approaching the target, as he always does, and I had tried to rest it on the edge of the stand because I get tired of holding it, and I dropped it, but it didn't make him waver at all. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He approached the target, he paused at it, and then he carefully took the reinforcement. He's always perfect like that. And then there are some that do an outstanding job during one session, like Rowena, this rainbow boa, who is targeting into her enclosure after she did a stellar job of targeting out and then engaging in this little foraging activity. And she's doing an excellent job of targeting back into her enclosure. Now we fast forward over a year and a half, and at least she came out of hiding. But this is the behavior that I get. And I could tell right off the bat that's all I was going to get. So I decided to work with the animal I had in front of me at the time and just place the target down and reward or reinforce what I could, which in this case, she at least came out. And after striking at the target once, she paused at the target, and I reinforced her because at least she's building that association. Now, in contrast, this is an extremely consistent Colombian rainbow boa, who every single time we do a target training session comes out of her enclosure and she just traverses anything that I put in front of her. In this case, it's a branch, and she goes down to this shift tub, this temporary station. Now, this is sped up 2 times because talk about slow and steady. She is extremely slow, and I just know that when I work with her, I have to give myself enough time to allow her to go through this process. So now we're fast forwarding to this week. And again, she was ready to engage. She sees the target and she immediately comes right out of her enclosure, and she's making her way over to the shift tub. But let me tell you, she does not do this quickly. Sometimes her sessions can take anywhere from 3 or 4 minutes all the way up to 10 or 11 minutes. And it isn't that she is hesitating. It's not that she's not doing the behavior. She's just that slow as she moves out of hiding, out of her enclosure, onto the shift, and then as she approaches the target and the food. Call it cautious, call it careful. I don't really care because her behavior is consistent every time. So she isn't going to win a speed competition, but if she was entered in a targeting competition for consistently doing the behavior that I'm asking her to every single time, she would definitely win because I never have an issue with her. And the other fabulous thing about her, her name is Sola, and she is turning 4 years old this year, is that when I'm done cleaning her enclosure and I put the station back next to her enclosure, that she just shifts herself back in. I don't have to target her back in. I don't have to prompt her to go back in. Again, it's very slow and steady. Like, she's in no rush to move from one place to another, but she does it consistently every single time. And I am thankful for that. And so again, when I work with her, I know that she's going to do a great job, but I know that she's going to take her time. And so I need to choose times to work with her when I am not in a hurry. This brings us to Tau Ceti, our super dwarf reticulated python. If you're a regular subscriber and follower of our channel, or if you've seen any of our super dwarf Sunday videos, you've probably seen TC engage in some truly outstanding training sessions to include voluntary microchipping. However, that's not anything close to what we get this week. It took him a little while to acknowledge the target, and then he stares at it for a while and then decides to just randomly strike in its direction, giving no thought whatsoever to where his body would end up after doing that behavior. I just stayed in place and held the target steady, and about 8 minutes later, he moved across the scale station, which he's very familiar with and often sits on voluntarily when we're not even training. And then he strikes at the target again, before we finally get the behavior that he knows how to do and that I'm asking him to do, which is to acknowledge the target, move in its direction, engage with it by resting his chin or the bottom of his jaw on it, and pausing there until I reinforce him, which is his clue that he can break the behavior, that the behavior's complete. So I don't really know what was up with him this week, but he also didn't wrap his tail around anything while he was eating, and he was slowly sliding off the scale station towards the floor, so I just gave him a little help here. And then during our second repetition, I reinforced something that was very, very simple, which was just him acknowledging the target and moving in its direction, because I'm having an issue with him focusing on me instead of focusing on the target. So he moves in the direction of the target and tongue flicks at it, and I decide that's as good as I'm going to get tonight, so I just go ahead and reinforce him for that. The one thing I will say about TC, even though his training sessions are consistently inconsistent, I never know what I'm going to get from him, he's always been outstanding about being handled, whether that's while he's eating a meal or at any other time, even when he's in blue, he's awesome being handled. We're going to finish up with one of my truly consistent learners. This is Kinsei. He's a Brettles python that's the same age as TC. And he'd already done one repetition where he shifted onto the scale. This is his second repetition, and he always does just exactly what he's supposed to during the target training sessions, approaches the target, pauses at it, takes his reinforcement.
Everybody, thank you so much for watching and joining me for another episode of Training Tuesday. I hope that helped you a little bit see that all of these different snakes learn not only at different rates and have different ability levels, but their levels of consistency vary widely. And some of them are just really good, hardcore workers and are going to give me consistent training sessions almost every single time. And then there are other snakes that I have here, like Tau Ceti, that I never know what I'm gonna get. We may have a stellar training session, we may have a mediocre one, or we may have a training session where he just looks at me like he has no idea what I'm asking. That's just normal. So please just love your animals no matter what. Have fun with your snakes and your other animals that you're training and interacting with, and love them and appreciate them for who and what they are. Until next time, everybody, please remember to be kind and love your animals.